The desert sun hammered against the wooden planks of the saloon porch, turning the air into a shimmering haze. Cassidy Dustbloom sat at a corner table, her finger tapping a steady, impatient rhythm against her glass. The ice clinked, a sharp sound in the heavy, still afternoon. Juno, Starfall, and Marrow Vex pulled up chairs, the metallic jingle of their spurs cutting through the low hum of the town. They did not order drinks. They leaned in, voices dropping to a rasping murmur as they traded reports on the rising tension. The town was a powder keg, and the fuse was already burning. Cassidy stopped tapping. She looked past them, toward the horizon where the tracks vanished into the heat. Juno followed her gaze, then stood abruptly, pointing a gloved hand toward the distant train station. A thick, oily plume of black smoke climbed into the clear sky, twisting like a dark omen against the blue. It was not a routine departure. Cassidy stood, her chair scraping harshly. Marrow checked the cylinder of his sidearm. They moved toward their horses, the urgency of the smoke pulling them forward. Hooves hammered the dry earth, kicking up a blinding curtain of grit that coated their skin. Cassidy leaned low over her horse, pushing the animal toward the rising black column. The station appeared as a jagged silhouette against the glare. They pulled the reins hard, bringing the horses to a sliding halt in the middle of the platform. The station owner sprinted toward them, his chest heaving, sweat carving pale tracks through the dust on his face. He grabbed the bridle of Cassidy's horse, his knuckles white. "They are already on board," he gasped, pointing a trembling finger. The engine hissed, venting steam that obscured the tracks. The trio did not waste time on questions. They dismounted in unison. They moved toward the passenger cars, keeping their heads down and their hands near their holsters. They slipped between the boarding passengers. The whistle blew, a long, mournful sound. The floor vibrated beneath their boots as the heavy iron wheels began to turn. The train gathered speed, the rhythmic clatter of wheels against steel filling the narrow aisles. Cassidy, Juno, and Marrow stood in the cramped space between cars, watching the landscape blur. Without warning, the floor bucked. A metallic screech tore through the air, followed by a violent, bone-jarring jolt that threw them against the walls. The train was losing speed, the iron couplings groaning under immense pressure. A masked figure emerged from the baggage car, his movements calculated and cold. He slammed a heavy lever, and the rear carriage, the one carrying the gold, began to slide away from the main engine. The gap between the cars widened, the sound of grinding metal rising to a deafening pitch. Cassidy did not hesitate. She kicked the door open and lunged for the ladder leading to the roof. Juno and Marrow followed, their boots finding purchase on the vibrating metal as they hauled themselves upward. The wind whipped across the top of the train, tearing at their hair and stinging their eyes. The roof swayed violently, pitching them from side to side as the carriage slowed. They sprinted across the slick, narrow surface, balancing against the momentum of the shifting train. The gap between the cars vanished. Cassidy leaped first, her boots slamming into the wooden roof of the gold carriage. Juno and Marrow landed a heartbeat later, the impact jarring their spines. They did not pause. Cassidy kicked the hatch open, and they dropped into the dim, cramped interior. The bandit was already waiting, his revolver leveled at the entrance. He fired, the sound deafening in the confined space, but the bullet splintered a crate of gold instead of flesh. Marrow lunged, tackling the man into a stack of heavy wooden boxes. The carriage rocked violently as they collided. Chairs shattered under the weight of the struggle, wood snapping like dry bone. Glass bottles of water smashed against the walls, showering the floor in jagged shards. The bandit fought with desperate, wild strength, throwing Marrow aside and swinging his heavy revolver as a club. Juno intercepted the blow, locking her arms around the man's chest while Cassidy moved in from the flank. They crashed into the remaining crates, the air thick with dust. The train ground to a final, shuddering halt. Cassidy, Juno, and Marrow hauled the prisoner out of the carriage and onto the sun-baked platform. The bandit stumbled, his boots dragging through the loose gravel, but they kept a firm grip on his arms. They marched him across the station yard, the only sound the rhythmic crunch of their footsteps and the distant whistle of the locomotive. The town was quiet, the midday heat pressing down. They reached the jailhouse, a sturdy building of stone and iron. Marrow kicked the door open. They shoved the prisoner inside, his body hitting the floor. Cassidy stepped back, her hand resting on the latch. The heavy iron door swung shut with a final booming resonance. The lock clicked. The threat was gone. The dust settled, and the station returned to its stillness, the gold shipment secure once more.